The main thing I know about my birth is I was born at home, and
You might want to tell the names.
I was born on a Friday about 12:35 in the afternoon, in the morning, midday, of March 3rd, 1933. And according to my father, by being born a boy, he agreed to get baptized into the church. And so he went down at 5 o'clock that evening and got baptized into the church.
Say his name.
His name is Harold Berg Hansen. And he was actually baptized on that day, but I believe that he kind of joshed us a little, because I know that he was seeing missionaries, and the baptism was set for that day, and he just told them that if he had a boy, he'd go through with it, and if he didn't, he wouldn't. Other than that, it was, I don't know of any particular trauma or anything that went along with the birth.
Yeah, and you can talk about it.
I was the first one, and I came 7 months after they got married, and after that all the children were 9 months. First. The next one was my sister, Carol Ann Hansen Sturzer, and she was born March the 4th on 1935. And then the next one was brother Charles Ray Hansen Stans, and he was born on the 27th of February, I think it was 1940. Well, it wasn't 40. 1939, I think. And then I had a little sister that was, I don't know when
No,
she...
Jim's next.
Well, that was Mary Ann that was married, and then my dad got a divorce to my mother and remarried, and my mother's name was Mabel Lindsay. And then
And how old were you when they divorced?
I was about 7 or 8, about 7. And then I went to live with my grandmother. I was in the 2nd grade, the middle of the 2nd grade, when I moved to live with my grandmother. And then my dad, who was working in Baltimore, Maryland at the time, he married my stepmother there. And they came back to take care of me and Carol Ann, who lived with my dad, and my brother Ray and Mary Ann went to live with my mother. And she lived out in Chesterfield or Redwood City, when we lived up on the East Bench. And while we were still living at Grandma's house, they had, my dad and stepmother had James Berg Hansen, my brother, and he is 11 years younger than I am. So he was born 1944.
Okay.
And then I have another sister that's, I think, 16 years younger than I am. And she was born when I was 16 in our home on Kensington Avenue, 2122 Kensington Avenue in Salt Lake City, Utah.
How old were you when you got baptized? Is that all the?
I was 10 years old when I got baptized.
Do you have any particular memories?
I think
of that?
9 or 10. No, I just remember being scared to death of it because the kids told me that they baptized you in salt water and you could strangle in it.
Who baptized you?
I've got the name, but I can't remember it.
So was it just someone in your ward?
Somebody in the ward. That is my grandmother's ward, right?
Okay.
Because I was 12 years old when I moved to Kensington Avenue, and so it was while we were living at Grandma's that I got baptized. And then I went on my mission when I was 20 years old. Actually, I turned 21 years old on the day I had my birthday on board ship between Rio de Janeiro and Santos, Brazil. And then I started my mission. So I started my mission on the first day of on my birthday. And then the mission went for 2.5 years. It took us a month to get to Brazil, and it took us a month to come home. We came home on airplane, but we traveled across the continent of South America. It took us a month to get across the continent of South America. And we used every conveyance almost imaginable except a donkey. We flew, we had a motor coach, we were on airplane, steamship, electric car, and an airplane. And then we left Lima and flew home in all these neat countries and neat places, and we never saw anything except the inside of an airport. We went to Panama City, to Quito, Ecuador. We were in Havana, Cuba, and Miami, Florida, and Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, and Denver, Colorado, and Salt Lake. And we only spent an hour or so in each airport waiting for our next plane. I got back in just before October conference in 1956. Well, I went to the University of Utah for about 2.5 years before I went on my mission. I also served in the Army Reserve from the time I was 17 until I went on my mission. At the time, when I decided to go on my mission, I understood that I was giving up my exemption from the draft and that which was inherent in the Army Reserve. I could only go up with the Army Reserve if it was called up. So I believed I was giving up that when I went on my mission. But while I was on my mission, some senators, probably a lot from Utah, got some laws passed that made it possible for me to go back into my Army Reserve outfit. So while I had been planning to do missionary work in the Army, when they let me get back into my reserve outfit, I was not unhappy. And I stayed in there for 12 years until until the Russian ships that were coming from there to Cuba, and there was a little bit of a standoff between the USA
1963.
and they were calling up the reservists to go and be a show of that we were serious about not letting them put missiles into Cuba. Then I decided, by that time I had finished college, or my bachelor's degree, and I had been accepted for a master's degree program, and I was in the middle of that. And so I went and got out of the Army Reserve, and then went on years later to get my PhD in counseling psychology. And I worked for a hospital. It's a 361st General Hospital.
It was a medical unit.
A medical unit, and I was a psychology specialist. And so when I went to summer camp, we would give psychological tests to people.
Let's hear about all the different places you worked.
Well, as a youngster, the first money I made was mostly caddying at the country club, and finding and selling golf balls at the Bonneville golf course. And then I worked at, there was a number of stores just a block or so away from us, and I worked at almost every one of those stores. One of them was a buy-right grocery store, and I worked at Johnny's Mountain View service station, which was 2 doors up. And then later I worked for Duffin's Ice Cream, which was in the middle of those two. And I was working there when I graduated from high school.
Tell about that.
Hmm?
It's interesting how you gained weight.
Oh, yeah, when I was younger, I'd always been real skinny, and I had kind of as a matter of fact, I still have reasonably skinny arms, and I could always wrap my fingers around my arms and overlap each other. But when I was going to high school, I was 125 pounds, and I was working at Duffin's Ice Cream, and I decided I was going to gain some weight, and so I forced myself to eat Eskimo bars, which is chocolate and vanilla bars. And after I'd eat a good meal, I'd eat 2 or 3 of those bars, and we could eat as many as we wanted on the job. We just couldn't carry any food away. And within a short period of time, I gained to 145 pounds. And then the next year, during the summer, I did the same thing, and I gained, let's see, 275 pounds. I gained 30 pounds. And kids would come into the ice cream store and look right through me because they didn't recognize me, until they finally caught on who I was, and they were just dumbfounded because I'd looked so different, having gone from 125 to 175 pounds. And it also seemed that the girls liked me a lot more because I got a lot more girls asking me for dates than they used to. And is there any? After working for Duffin's Ice Cream, I got in trouble one day with having a little argument with my boss. He asked me to do something, and I says, I know my job, and that can't be done the way you want it to be done. And he says, I want you to do it anyway. and we'd had a little tiff, and so my boss walked away. And about the next, a couple of days later, he called me up to his office and he let me go. And so I learned not to sass back to bosses. I got another job at Nibley service station, and that's the job I had when I went on my mission when I was 21. Little incident happened while I was there. I had a car that had some banged up fenders, and some Mexicans came by the station. Well, they came by the house and asked me if they could, because they saw I needed some work done on the car, and so they said, can we pound out these crinks in your car, and we'll do it for $25. I said, well, I'm sorry, I can't do now because I've got to go to work. And they said, that's okay, we'll come down with you. So they followed me down to work. And then they went around to fix the car, and they'd gone about a half hour maybe, and came back. And they had kind of straightened them out, and they took and just put a little bit of gray paint on it. And that very minute I knew I'd been had because I committed to do it. And so I said, well, I committed to do it, so I gave them the $25, and then they went over to their friends that were sitting in the car, and they were all laughing, and then took off down the street. So I think I got ripped off on that one.
Do you want to tell about that picture
What picture?
that you was in a car wreck? Because we've got the picture, and I think we ought to know.
Oh, this wanted me to tell about it, an incident when I was living at Grandpa's house, and probably I was 9 or 10 at that time, and I was walking. We'd been out in the farmer's field. There's a lot of Japanese farmers that lived around us, and I was walking north or south on 3rd East, and was going to turn and go down the street on 25th South, which is Whitlock Avenue, and that's where my folks lived. My grandparents at 252 Whitlock Avenue, and we were on 3rd East. And I just walked across the street without looking, and a car ran into me, and the lights went out. The next thing I know, I'd been taken to the General Hospital on State Street and 21st South. And I was later bandaged up. I had just a cut on my chin and one on my head. And so they put a big bandage on that one on my chin. And then the newspaper came and took a picture of it. And we've got a picture of me all wrapped up in those little bandages from that big car wreck. And that was her walking into the car. And that's about the only problem. I did have another time where I broke my arm, and I broke it at what was then a new Safeway store, and the kids had been playing around, and we just played like we had broken arms, or I played like I had a broken arm, and wrapped it in a sling. And the kid says, "Oh, you better not do that, or it could happen." And a couple of days later, I was playing around on the dirt, and stood up on top of the construction shed where they kept their tools, and there was this nice little mound of dirt down there, and I jumped down on the mound and did a 3-point landing with my hand and 2 feet, and it broke my wrist, and so I had my real sling to go with. And so I decided I'm not going to play like I'm sick anymore, because it's likely to happen. And one other time we were playing with sticks out at Grandpa's, and we were playing swords, and I was watching. They flipped off just a tip of that sword stick and hit me in the eye. And I've not had real good vision in that eye ever since. I went to my doctor, and he says, well, as you go along, your eyesight will get better and better. But it caused a little scar in there which lets too much light in. So if I want to see really good, I can put my hand up to my face and block out the sun or the light that comes in, and I can see pretty good. But that's the only real accidents, I guess, that I've ever had.
You didn't tell about your first job after when you came home from the mission. Didn't you work 3
Oh, yeah.
different places?
After I come home from my mission, the first job I had was working for ZCMI and selling shirts. And right across the street was where my girlfriend worked. That's my wife, Ruth, at Heber J. Grant and Company. And I worked at ZCMI, and then we'd visit each other every once in a while for lunch. And as soon as Christmas was over, they let all of us guys go, and I was one of them that they let go. And so then I went out and got another job through the only job that I remember I ever got through the employment office. And I worked in a box car just about a half a block away from where my dad worked at Nelson Rick's Creamery. And I worked about 2 weeks there, and as soon as the box car was unloaded, I was unloaded. So apparently it just took us on long enough to unload their box car, and it was for the Chiv division of Chevrolet General Motors Chiv division, and they would just send their parts up there in box cars, and I guess they'd hire people for a day or two to unload their box cars, and that was it.
Is that when you'd go around and fill orders for people?
No. Well,
Was that the job?
I don't know.
I thought you had those two. I thought ZCMI was your last one.
No, those were the two.
Hey, how about
Okay.
telling about your job for the VA?
Well, after I got home on Halloween, I had my first date with Ruth. A friend of mine, and it was a blind date, a friend of mine set me up with Ruth, and normally I wasn't into blind dates that much. Of course, I hadn't been dating at all. I was on my mission, so. But anyway, we went to a ward Halloween dance, and it was really fun, and Ruth was good to dance to, and she was easy to talk with, and so I started dating her at that time. And after we dated for we actually had been dating for 6 months when we got married. And it was a little bit before that, like a month or two, and I thought, well, geez, I can't get married. I was dead broke. For Christmas, I didn't have any money, and so I had to give away all my souvenirs from Brazil. And I even stopped seeing Ruth for a few days because I didn't have any money to buy her a
2
present.
weeks.
And then finally I decided I had to get a job, so I got a job with the VA hospital 1 month before we got married. That was in April, and by May the 17th was the day we got married. And I took my first paycheck to buy her a ring. We got engaged, and then I worked for them for about the next 5 or 6 years, and I was able to go to school and work in the hospital. and be able to do studies in the hospital. And so it was like the most wonderful scholarship program you could ever have. And so we were married, and I went to school, and I worked at the VA hospital, and I did that until I got out of school, finished my college, my undergraduate. And then one day I found out that I could just quit the VA and tell them how many days I'd want to work. And so I said I'd like to work on Saturday and Sunday, and I'm going to quit. And in the meantime, I got a job working. My bishop actually got the job for me in a way. He came to visit us out in Granger. And he says, I noticed you've been paying your tithing really good, but you haven't been paying any fast offerings or any budget. I says, well, we would, but we're really short on money. We just don't have much money. And he asked me about what my education was, and I told him it was in psychology. I got a degree in psychology and got a teacher certificate. And he asked me what I'd like to do, and I said, I think I'd like to be a marriage counselor. And he says, well, I know how you could do that by getting your master's degree in social work. And he happened to be a social worker, so he took me around and introduced me to all the big shots at the county welfare department, and then told me the steps I had to take in order to get the job. So finally I got the job. I was working as a caseworker, and that was in December, and by the next school year starting, I had a scholarship to go to get my master's degree, and the state agreed to pay me 3/4 salary while I went and got my master's degree. And then from there, I worked for 6 years. Well, at first I had to work 3 years at the welfare department to pay off the agreement that I had with them, and then I went to work for LDS LDS Hospital with their outpatient mental health clinic.
But you just started at Cottonwood.
Yeah, not yet. And I worked about 6 years there, and decided that I probably was too comfortable, and that I was talked into by one of my friends that used to work for me in the welfare department to work for the church. And so I was able to transfer over to work for the church, and so they gave me credit for the 6 years I'd spent at the hospital towards retirement. And then I went to work for the church at LDS Social Services as a counselor. And while I was there, I was lent to the Cottonwood Hospital to help start their social work program, and I was the first social worker that they had at the Cottonwood Hospital.
Okay.
After that, I worked for the rest of the bulk of the rest of my career with LDS Social Services, and was eventually transferred to Richfield, Utah, where my brother lived. And I went down. They sent me down there to do Indian work, which I had never done before. And then I worked there until I retired. Prior to retirement, a few years before retirement, they loaned me to the prison in Gunnison to help them with the program. And when I got there, we found out that the program was really would not really be fit for them. But in the meantime, I found out that that there was a use that could be made of me, and that was to do therapy with the inmates. And so I started a program there called, which the inmates and me helped, and they gave it the name. What they called the program was Inner Healing. And what we did is from reading that I'd done and experiences that I'd had before, I realized that most people get into trouble because of choices that they make in their lives, and choices relating to feeling. That when people have too many hurts and they try to block or cover for those hurts, they eventually become hardened. And as they get more hardened, then they're not able to be guided by their own conscience and will often get into trouble. And we found out that with these inmates, that most of them are giving up forever being able to change. And we found out that we could teach these inmates how to feel. And we provided a place for them to feel, and then we'd help them. And the ones that did all the therapy were the inmates that do therapy on each other, and I would guide and supervise and teach. And eventually we had some marvelous experiences with those inmates being able to change and no longer be criminals. So
You ought to mention about when you started doing this therapy. You didn't just start.
oh no, I know that. I had started doing it when I was working for LDS Social Services, and I discovered that I found something that was a tremendously healing experience. And in my early years in counseling, I found that people didn't heal very easily, and I wondered if people could even be helped. In fact, I prayed about it for years until I finally decided they could be helped. But I set a real low standard for what help would be. And while I was with LDS Social Services, through people that I had worked with, I learned that there were some very powerful ways of helping people with their problems. And eventually I learned that it turned out to be the powerful methods that God has used all the time, called repentance. And repentance means to feel. And people that are deeply involved in religion and the gospel generally are considered to be more feeling people. And that others outside of that are not able to be feeling, the Book of Mormon says that they're hard-hearted and blind-minded and stiff-necked. And there's just describing people that have shut down their feelings and hardened themselves to survive. But they didn't understand what price it would come at. And once I found out that it was the same good old therapy that God had been teaching from the beginning of time, I was absolutely sold on it. And so that's how I plan to spend my days, is in writing about those the things that we've learned in that